Now, there is a reason why we are inviting you today, obviously, and that is the fact that we are launching today a communication campaign on climate. Now, when we were preparing for this media briefing, discussing with Liz and with John, we noticed that lots of you are very familiar with the issue of climate change and the consequences of it. You might actually know more about it than I do. Yeah. Now, the highlight of what I want to focus in today is that as much as you know about climate change and the consequences, I'm pretty sure that the impact on children continues to be underestimated. Yeah. And this is what the whole communication campaign on climate that UNICEF is launching today is about, is to highlight the impact on climate change on children and the necessity for us to prioritize in everything we do with regard to the climate change response, for the sake of a better word, to prioritize the issue of children. Now, the campaign that we are launching today is exactly about that. It's about creating more awareness among the people in terms of the impact of climate change on children, and advocating for all of us in whatever we do, in whatever capacity we are interacting on the issue of climate change, to make sure that the issue of children is being prioritized, that we have children being centered in our response. Let me go a little bit on a few slides, and then we can have a short discussion about the campaign. Unfortunately, video, I will have to move a little bit to my screen, but I'll come back. So first of all, since a few years, it's not new, but the message has to be re-emphasized every time again. UNICEF has been highlighting that the climate change crisis is actually a child rights crisis. Yeah. There is a reason for that. Yeah. The reason for that is that the climate change is impacting dramatically in the lives of children worldwide. Yeah. Everywhere, children are growingly exposed to climate and environmental hazards such as flooding, drought, heat waves, cyclones, and air pollution. Now, what does that mean in terms of impact? We all have in mind examples of how climate change has its impact on the rights of children. Yeah. It impacts in the sense that it has an influence on the health of children. Yeah. We know that climate change has or is contributing to more health emergencies, that diarrheal diseases increase. And we know that those that are the most affected by these health emergencies are children. Because of their vulnerability, because of their situation of still being in a growing situation, when health emergency occur, children are the ones that are most affected. Yeah. Together with that, one of the direct consequences that we see in terms of climate change is the impact on access to water. And I should maybe clarify and be more specific. It's the access to clean and safe water. Yeah. There is, due to climate change, a risk of more scarcity of water, or the opposite, because of flooding, water gets polluted. So the access to clean, safe water becomes more problematic. Yeah. And that contributes to these health epidemics that I was, or emergencies that I was referring to. And again, children are the most affected by that, right? And you also know that when a child is being affected by are impacted by diarrheal diseases, the likeliness for the impact on children to be fatal is much bigger than with adults, right? Yeah. So this all summarizes how climate change, in terms of its impact on health, access to water, has a very evident impact on children. But it's not only limited to health. It also has an impact on education. Yeah? We know that from the experience Zimbabwe went through also a couple of years ago with regard to the cyclone in the east of the country, that schools are very much affected by climate change hazards. Yeah? Schools are being destroyed, and the accessibility of schools becomes more problematic, right? Consequence of that, children that yesterday were going to school might not be able to continue their education because of climate change. Yeah. We also know that when access to water becomes more tricky, when there is more scarcity of water, when the distance that people need to walk to get access to clean and safe water, when that distance becomes bigger, the likeliness that risks happen with regard to exploitation and abuse, including gender-based violence, increases. And who is the one that goes to fetch water? It's often children, not to say most likely it's going to be children. So it all comes together, and that's why we say the climate change crisis is a child rights crisis. It impacts more on children than on anybody else, and it impacts on their fundamental rights to have access to healthcare, to water, to education, to child protection, right? Now, I don't know whether I'm telling you something new. I hope not. But that being said, it's not a message that is necessarily widely spread and widely understood by all audiences. So we need to work on that. And therefore, we need your support, and it's great that we can work with you on that. Now, I was speaking in terms of general, in terms of generalities and how climate change impacts on children. But we all know that Zimbabwe also is going to be growingly impacted by the consequences of climate change. Again, I could refer to the cyclone of a couple of years ago. We have the drought that we are going to face, or that we are facing as of now, and that is going to be challenging us in the month to come. We're not obviously the only country. In terms of drought, we're speaking about the whole southern of Africa, but you might have seen recently also some visuals about what is happening in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in terms of flooding, etc. So it's happening all over the place, even in countries like my own country, my home country, that thought to be protected against the consequences of climate change. We also went to extreme flooding 2 years ago, where whole villages were completely destroyed. By the way, I'm from Belgium, so this is not a country that is supposed to be at high level of risks. So all countries in the world are now facing the consequences of climate change, including Zimbabwe. And UNICEF in 2021, and you can go on the global website of UNICEF to find that, developed what we called a Children's Climate Risk Index, which tries to measure how risky it is for a child to live in a certain country in terms of the likeliness to be affected by climate change hazards. And unfortunately, Zimbabwe has also been highlighted as a country that is under high risk. Yeah? There are obviously countries that are on higher risk. You know that some of the islands in the world might just disappear because of climate change consequences. But Zimbabwe is clearly indicated also or highlighted as a country at risk. Now, summarizing a little bit what I just said, it's important to remember that children obviously are the least responsible for climate change hazards, basically. Yeah, they're not the ones that actually have been polluting and overusing our natural resources with the consequences that we are facing now. So it's fair to say that they're probably the least responsible for what the world is going through in terms of climate change. But, as I said, because of the specificities of children, their vulnerability, for all good reasons that I just highlighted, they're the most impacted by the consequences of climate change, which they are not responsible for. Yeah. And while this is something that is not questioned anymore, we see that children are still largely missing in the climate change dialogue, in the climate change debate. The attention that is given to children with regard to the climate change challenges remains, according to us, too low, not only in terms of what are we doing, quote unquote, to protect them against the consequences of climate change, but also in terms of how are we putting responses in place that make us to be more resilient to climate change challenges on the long term, and also in terms of asking children and adolescents about their own thinking, their own contributions in putting in place responses, be it mitigation, adaptation, with regard to the climate change challenges. Therefore, we as UNICEF, we're calling for particular interventions with regard to the agenda on climate, environment, and energy. First, we ask, or we call for children to be put at the center of climate change policies, strategies, plans, and budget, and to make them child sensitive. Yeah. Based on everything I said, I think this becomes very obvious and natural. If we say that children are the most impacted, and therefore we need to invest more attention on the issue of children, that means that policies, strategies, plans, budgets needs to be child sensitive and child focused. Secondly, we're calling for us to empower children and young people to be environmental stewards and climate change agents, allowing them to realize their full potential with their full participation. Yeah? We should not only do things for children and adolescents, let's do it with them. For a world that will be more theirs tomorrow than it will be ours, right? Yeah? We are building the world of tomorrow today, and that world of tomorrow is going to be the world that they will be leading, that they will be living in much more than we. Some of us might not be in that world anymore at that given time. Yeah. So let them participate in much more than we do today in the building of that future, and therefore to tackle the issues of climate change. We need to enable children's participation in the climate agenda, critical for their future, to ensure that their future is fit for today's children and for their future. Maybe that's obviously you as climate change journalists, you're fully aware of that. We have evolved from a situation where we were speaking about it's important to work and to be attentive for around the climate because of tomorrow, to a situation where today we are aware that we need to act now because of today. Yeah? It's not an agenda of tomorrow anymore. The climate change impact is happening as we speak. With cyclones, with drought, with flooding, with etc. So it's not about building a better future for tomorrow, it's also to make sure that the today allows us to guarantee the survival of children and for children to thrive. And finally, we're calling for climate resilient services in all the sectors that we intervene in. Yeah. Nothing new, but important to remind ourselves. climate change hazards is the reality of today and will be the reality of tomorrow. So anything we do with regard to providing access to health services, providing access to water, sanitation and hygiene, providing access to education, ensuring child protection, needs to be informed by that reality of climate change hazards, which we didn't have yesterday. Yeah? Let me give you a very basic example. A school that is today built in Chimanimani needs to be built with the knowledge that tomorrow there might be, again, cyclones happening. Yeah? And therefore, for instance, roofs need to be built in a way that they're much more robust than they used to be in the past. Yeah? If we build a water point, yeah, we need to make sure that that water point is protected against flooding. Flooding creating pollution. It's likely, depending on where we are, etc., but it's more likely that flooding will happen compared to what we were doing in the past. That is what we mean by building climate resilient interventions. Yeah? Because obviously it is going to be more effective when we build a school that can actually survive a cyclone so that education can continue. Yeah? Instead of having to rebuild it every 5 years, every time there is a cyclone happening. That is going to be less effective in terms of guaranteeing continued access to education, because if the school is destroyed and then you have to rebuild during that period, children will not be able to go to school. But also in terms of financial efficiency, even though that school might be a little bit more expensive to build, if you have to build it once, it's going to be less expensive than to have to rehabilitate it 5 or 6 times in a row. Yeah? So that I'm giving you just a theoretical example, but that shows you the importance of that call to provide climate resilience services. Again, climate change is not something that we're talking about in terms of the impact on children tomorrow. It is there today. So whatever we do today, we need to make sure that it is informed, inspired by the knowledge that climate change hazards will happen. And let's make sure that we build services in a way that they are resilient, capable of resisting basically to the consequences of climate change hazards. Now, as I said in the beginning, some of you are experts in climate change. You probably know more about climate change than I do. I'm just a communication officer. I'm not a specialist. But what we are convinced about is that, what I said in the beginning, that link between climate change and children, and the impact on children, and the lack of focus on children, the lack of investment on children, is something that we still face today. And therefore your support, work with you, is of extreme importance, because you can actually transmit that message in terms of climate change has to be, or climate change responses have to be child-centered and child-focused. And therefore, today we are launching that communication campaign which will last for 3 months as of April till the end of June, with as objectives first to strengthen awareness on the impact of climate change on children, to put children at the center of the climate change debate, and to call for more climate change funding to be child-focused, child-centered. Yeah. With regard to that last one, we are advocating for all the countries, including Zimbabwe, to create mechanisms that allow the countries to measure not only what they do in terms of climate change, but to measure what they do specifically on children with regard to climate change. And that comes back to what I said earlier in terms of climate change resilient services that are being built, giving a voice to children and adolescents to be part of the climate change debate, giving them the opportunity, empower them to be actors of change with regard to climate change, and to make sure that climate change policies and strategies are child-centered, right? There is a figure, and later on Liz will give you a news note that you can work with. There is a figure in terms of multilateral climate change funds and investments, which only capture for 2.4% children and child right dimensions. Yeah. So there's a lot of progress that is still possible or that is needed to make sure that children are centered in our climate response. So I think that we all agree that there is need for more investment in climate change responses. Yeah? What we are advocating for is not only that, we are advocating for the fact that whatever is being invested in climate change, a larger portion goes to children and child rights. And that means also that we call for countries also to be able to measure that, yeah, with tools that they develop. Now, this campaign is not a campaign that starts today and that where all activities are actually launched today. It's a campaign that will grow organically, and new activities will be added as we move on. And I take the opportunity here also to invite you to come with potentially ideas, suggestions you might have, which I hope, obviously, you're being inspired by what I just said. I see some critical faces, but anyway. So, a few things that are being done as of today. If you go on our country website, thanks to John, our digital communication officer, you'll see that the landing page is, as of now, dedicated to climate change, that there is a feature page. There are lots of stories, research studies that are available, and as we move on, more will become available. We'll do missions in the field to document what child-centered climate change responses might look like, what is happening in Zimbabwe, etc. We're going to call also adolescents, in the spirit of what I said earlier, we're going to call adolescents to share with us their own messages in terms of why they think there should be more investment in children and adolescents when we deal with climate change. Yeah? It wouldn't be consistent with our message for us just to talk on behalf of children and adolescents while we say that we need to give them a voice. So in this campaign, we'll try to give them a voice as well. And I call on of you also to speak with children, with adolescents. And you might be, and we can help you and put you in touch with children and adolescents. You might be surprised to what extent children and adolescents today are active around climate change. Not necessarily only in talking, which is also important, in debates, in discussions, etc., in awareness building, but also in concrete, down-to-earth activities in their own community, related to the collection of waste, related to the use of water, etc. So we have, or we can put you in contact also with adolescents that are active, and you can be also vehicles and media to promote children to become even more vocal and active around that debate. So we will be calling children and adolescents to send us messages that we can then post on our social media, which will be a strong call, hopefully, for more child-centered climate change investment, and will de facto also show that adolescents and children can be actors of change and should not just be seen as victims of the climate change hazards. We will be running a campaign where also adults can participate in a petition campaign, where we will ask people to sign up for the calls that I presented earlier. We will be organizing also media activities. When I came in the room, if I'm not mistaken, John, you were talking already about media, field missions, etc. We have been organizing since a year and a half a growing number of field media missions on different topics, on education, on healthcare, on child protection, and on other issues. So there will be also some media field missions organized around the issue of climate change. And so Liz and John will be in touch with you. But I reiterate what I said earlier. If you have ideas in terms of activities that you are interested in potentially running through your media houses alongside this campaign, we can discuss that and see how that can work. Yeah. Don't be too enthusiastic about the funding issue, just to avoid that we lose too much time. If you come with proposals that have a lot of funding requirements, I'm afraid it's not going to happen, because John and me, we are very poor people in terms of funding we have at our disposal. And that there are going to be more activities. We're planning to have a campaign song recorded by adolescents around climate. Some of you are familiar with our You Reporters program, where we ask actually adolescents to report on things that they are concerned about, things that matter to them. So we will be running You Report activities, including what we do regularly, and that is polls that we organize through SMS and through WhatsApp, where we ask adolescents to express themselves on particular issues. So in this case, obviously on climate change. We're planning also a few events around the campaign between now and the end of June. Now, those that have been attentive will have seen on the first slide the visual of the campaign. So this is the visual that we are going to use on the campaign. If you go on our country website, you'll see that it is the landing page of our campaign now. And the slogan that we use is invest in climate, invest in children. With all dimensions that it includes in terms of a call. If you want to invest in climate, make sure that you invest in children. If you want to make a difference for climate, make sure that you invest in children and that children are being prioritized. That's what I wanted to share with you this morning. Again, thank you very much for your presence. I hope you will be able to share the messages through your media houses to your audiences. But I'm obviously happy to take any of your questions, if there are any, knowing that we remain open for also suggestions and questions in the weeks and the months to come. So over to you, if you have any questions or remarks. Thank you very much.